holy name of the Lord. Harer Nama, Harer Nama, Harer Nama, Eva Kevalam, Kalo Nastyeva, Nastyeva, Nastyeva Gatiranyata. That in this age of Kali, there is no shelter but the holy name of the Lord. This is extremely important. We may be very interested in performing service. We may be very interested in reading. We may be very interested in whatever, in different kinds of activities. But if we do not show interest, if we do not show attention, if we do not show importance to chanting the holy name of the Lord, connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in this age of Kali is basically impossible. This is what our Acharya says, this is what Shastra says. The holy name is so important. And how do you apply that? So for instance, in this verse, we see that if we become regulated in eating, sleeping, recreation, etc., then we can be attentive in our japa. Otherwise, it's very difficult to become attentive in our japa. Same thing with basically Shravanam Kirtanam. This is Bhakti Yoga. Without Shravanam and Kirtanam, there is no Bhakti. It's very difficult to perform to sadhana bhakti without Shravana and Kirtan. In fact, I don't even know of any instance of that. Shravanam, Kirtanam is extremely important. Then comes Smaranam. Smaranam, remembrance, which is what Prahlad Maharaj did. Smaranam, he's a perfect yogi. He was able to remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead without any problems because he was a pure devotee. But for us, if we don't perform proper Shravanam and Kirtanam, which specifically begins with chanting the holy name of the Lord offenselessly, hearing the holy name offenselessly, and chanting the holy name offenselessly. So we hear the holy name offenselessly, and we chant the holy name offenselessly. So by doing this, we can remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why do we need to remember Him? Because he is the only object that is worth remembering. Everything else that is not connected to Him is Maya. What is that Bhagavatam verse? Riteyattam pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tad vidyad atmano maya yata bhaso yata tamaha. That this is Chatushloki Bhagavatam. Comes in the next chapter 9. Of the second canto. So Krishna says in that, he tells Brahma that understand that everything in connection with him is reality. And everything that is not in connection with him, one should understand to be as Maya. If anything is not connected to Krishna, that is Maya. And therefore, if we are to understand that we are parts and parcels of Krishna, and that as parts and parcels of Krishna, we are constantly and always situated in Krishna's energy. Krishna is everywhere around us. He is situated in our own hearts. Sometimes, we can think like this, that, we may be in great distress, but Krishna is right there in our heart. He's right there. It's quite inconceivable to think that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who we cannot perceive, is right in our heart. He is closer to us than anybody we can even think to be the most closest to us. There is nobody closer to the soul than the Super Soul, the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's how close Krishna is. And therefore here the Vedas describe him as mother. And Srila Prabhupada explains that as the mother is neutral to all different kinds of children, the Supreme Father or Mother is also. So, if one wants to perceive the Supreme Lord situated in the hearts of all living entities, including devotees, then one has to chant the holy name properly. Without chanting the holy name attentively, without chanting the holy name offenselessly, one cannot be a candidate for Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is also called as Bhakti Yoga. Now, the other processes of yoga, you cannot even practice them in this age of Kali. Why? Because the life is too short. The mind is, that's already stated in the Bhagavatam. Prayena alpayusha shabdya kalavasmin yuge jana manda sumanda matayo manda bhagya upadritaha. That in this age of Kali, people have short lives, they're short-lived. Prayena alpayusha shabdya kalavasmin yuge jana manda, they are dull, they're very dull-headed. Manda sumanda matayo. They also, what is Mandabhagya, they are unfortunate. And Upadritaha, on top of all this, they are always disturbed. There's always something that causes us disturbance. There is something or the other. Our health causes us disturbance. If the health is okay, something else causes us disturbance. There is some disturbance all the time. I don't know about all of you. I can't think of one week where I could just say, well, that was a peaceful week. Doesn't exist. At least for me, it doesn't exist. Something or the other always keeps coming up. Some surprise or the other. Something. There's always something that just doesn't go right. Every week. It's difficult. Sometimes you say, well, that was a perfect day. And that's it. And then maybe you might get another perfect day maybe next year, or something like that. It's that rare. It is really that rare. When, you can say, well, this is day, I got all my rounds done right. I was, fired up at the kirtans. I was attending the Bhagavatam classes. I was, performing my service with enthusiasm, and I didn't waste time. I read Prabhupada's books today, and, I interacted with all the devotees the way I should interact with them. And everybody interacted also in the way they should interact with me, and everything was perfect. The weather was perfect. Everything was perfect. Where's such? I don't know. I can't think of some day like that. It's difficult to imagine. Maybe sometimes you may rarely feel something like this, but the truth is, there's always something that happens. It's the age of Kali. There's always some disturbance, something or the other. Something has to happen. Even if your activity is all sincere and this and that, something has to happen. And that's the age. Even in our services, the different services that we perform, even if it's the same service, there's always something that comes up that you don't expect. So in this disturbed age, our minds are disturbed. Therefore, it's practically impossible for us to perform the other processes of yoga. The only hope for us is to be Krishna conscious. But to be a proper candidate for being Krishna conscious, we have to chant the holy names offenselessly. And therefore, the instructions that are found in this chapter, while we may think that, initially when I used to read this chapter, I was like, this chapter is I can't relate to anything in this chapter. It's so far out, it's so far off. But if we apply these principles that are stated in this chapter, this is the mood of Prabhupada's purports are all in that mood. Prabhupada explains everything in connection to Krishna consciousness, because actually Bhakti Yoga is the perfection of all the other types of yoga processes. Therefore, it actually contains elements of the other yoga processes that are found over there for the purpose of becoming Krishna conscious, for the purpose of becoming a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, in this chapter, we see how the devotee, understanding that he sees that the Supreme Lord is everywhere. The Supreme Lord is in all living beings, and he also sees all living beings in him. The only way you can see all living beings in the Supreme Personality of Godhead is if you understand that they are all situated on the Supreme Lord's energy. And the example that's given of that is the object that we can think to be all pervasive, that to the best of our material senses, is the sun. The sun travels, when we travel like 3 hours away, the sun seems to be following us. Also, the sunlight is spread everywhere. And therefore, the Vedas give that as an example, that they say everything is situated on sunlight. Because sunlight is all pervading. It's everywhere. And everything is situated on that sunlight. It's resting on that sunlight. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is spread everywhere in the form of his energies. And he is also personally present in everything as Paramatma. But because he is absolute, he can use his energies to appear through his energies at any point of time he wants. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, although this is matter, he is situated within this. And if he so wishes, he can appear as the personality of Godhead from this object. And therefore, in Vedic culture also, especially Krishna conscious culture, we learn to respect different things in relation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We don't like, for instance, some of our devotees has got passports today. It's just a passport. Why offer that? But we understand that it's the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because with this passport you're going to be able to, go to the Holy Dham. So, you see that in connection with that, then that very object no longer just becomes some mundane passport, just doesn't become a book that people use to go and gratify their senses, to go and find, sense gratification in different parts of the world, but rather that very normal thing that every citizen of this country can own becomes an object in connection with the Supreme Personality of God. And in this way, a devotee spiritualizes everything that they receive. Everything, nothing, everything becomes worshipable. Nothing becomes something that you don't worship. Everything is treated with respect. And when we treat everything with that connection with the Supreme, and every living entity, it's not that, this devotee, that devotee. We have to understand that within the heart of every single devotee, apart from that individual soul, the super soul is also situated. And therefore, when we insult a living entity, we are also insulting the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is situated within the heart of that particular devotee. It is not something to be taken very lightly. A devotee does not try to cause harm to other living entities needlessly. Needless harm, needless violence. This also should be understood. Why? Because if we cause pain, needless pain to another living entity, the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is situated in the heart of that living entity is pained. And guess what? That same Supreme Personality of Godhead is in our heart also. How can we be happy? We cannot be happy. So, it's important to understand that every living entity is situated in him in one way or another. So right now all living entities in this material, in the material world are situated on his material energy. Ultimately, every living entity has to be situated in one energy or another. This is the constitutional position. Let's also understand this. Prabhupada is making this point very clearly here. He says that in either case, the living entity is a servant of God. The living entity, although part of the superior energy, is conditioned by inferior energy. The living entity is always in the Lord's energy. Every living entity is situated in him one way or another. So there are some people who claim that the living entity was never situated in the spiritual world, and before the living entity came to the material world or became conditioned in the material world, the living entity was somewhere in between. They can't really explain what that in-between state means. Sometimes they say the living entities fell from Brahman. The point is, it's very clear that either the living entity is situated in spiritual energy or material energy. There is no position where the living entity is situated neither in the material energy nor in the spiritual energy. The living entity himself is one of the energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as Tatastha Shakti, the living entity, his position is to become influenced either by the external energy or the internal energy. There is only two. There are only two energies. So it's going to get influenced by either the external energy or the internal energy. If right now we are influenced by the external energy, then previously, some point of time, before we came here, we were influenced by the spiritual energy. We have forgotten our position. We desire to become separate from Krishna, and we are here. When we reform ourselves, we go back to the spiritual energy. There is no state of limbo. the Christian conception of limbo, where you're just hanging there in between. You're neither in heaven nor hell or something like this, some weird state. It doesn't exist. So this is another important point to understand here, that every living being is situated in the energy of the Lord. And every living being is situated in the energy of the Lord. And while we're in material energy, the living entity serves the material senses, while in spiritual energy, he serves the Supreme Lord directly. So, what is the difference between the material energy and the spiritual energy? In the material energy, one serves one's own senses. One is forgetful of Krishna. The difference between material energy and spiritual energy is that when the living entity is situated in spiritual energy, the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes revealed. The nature of the material energy is to cover the living entity so that he cannot see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How is that explained? It's explained like a cloud. The cloud doesn't actually cover the sun. That's the example that's given. The cloud doesn't actually cover the sun. But for us, because we are so small, the cloud seems to cover the sun and it seems to block out the sun. So the material energy, Maya, is like this, that it covers us. It doesn't cover the sun. The cloud may cover a portion of this earth, and then people who are in that portion cannot see the sun. But the sun is way above the clouds. Similarly, Supreme Personality of Godhead is way above Maya. And Maya covers the individual living entities. When the individual living entities are covered by Maya, they cannot see Krishna. When one becomes situated in spiritual energy, immediately Krishna becomes revealed. He becomes seen. This is the nature of being Krishna conscious. It's not that maybe we'll see Krishna, maybe we won't see Krishna, not like that. When one is situated when one becomes Krishna conscious, when one is no longer in Maya, when one no longer has material desires, and one is a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one serves the Supreme Lord directly. One can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly. This is the nature of being Krishna conscious. Because you're conscious of Krishna, you see Krishna. So in this way, when we see, at least we can start cultivating by seeing devotees that actually within each and every body, within the body of each devotee is a sincere spirit soul. And that spirit soul has an innate nature to serve Krishna perfectly. Even the most conditioned person, even the biggest rascal, even the biggest demon, ultimately in their intrinsic position, that living entity is a pure servant of Krishna. And Krishna is there in that living entity's heart. So this vision of equality is perfect in a person in Krishna consciousness. So basically in that, Krishna in this verse, and I mean he begins about seeing him in this verse, about seeing himself as being present everywhere, and then he continues that in the next 2 verses, 3 verses, and then after that Arjuna becomes anxious and says that I cannot practice this form of yoga. This is very difficult. So I mean that's a very interesting section that comes after that. But I'll stop here. If there are any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. Any questions and comments? He becomes fully situated in his position of being a servant of Krishna. What does that mean? It means that he understands that there is no enjoyment separate to that of Krishna. He's fully convinced of this situation. He's fully convinced about this. And because of that, he does not desire to enjoy separately from Krishna. And that comes through association with Krishna in this age of Kali, through association of him in the form of his holy name. That the holy name is so potent that by association with Krishna in the form of the holy name, and again all these processes of devotional service has to be done in the association of devotees. That's standard, understanding. But the point is, by associating with Krishna in the form of the holy name, one's devotional creeper becomes watered, and one's devotional creeper grows, and one's experience of Krishna consciousness becomes more and more and more real. It's not something just in theory. Like right now, for all of us, seeing Krishna directly is something that is theoretical. So initially for us, we are asked to first recognize Krishna's existence. And that is the point of this chapter. We are recognizing Krishna's existence everywhere. A person has to recognize the existence of the sun behind the clouds. And how do you begin recognizing that existence? You may see some light somewhere. You don't see the source of that light. It just looks like there's some light. Maybe there's a streak of light that's coming somewhere. So through that, one perceives Krishna's existence. So similarly, when we see all these, when we look around us, we are looking at so many things. A devotee, when he becomes Krishna conscious, or gradually as he is becoming Krishna conscious, he starts to identify things in relation to Krishna. He starts to see things in relation with Krishna, and not in relation with just the body, or his body particularly. Before we came to Krishna consciousness, we think that, okay, it's like Maharaj was making point in a lecture recently that now if you're Russian, you have to hate Ukrainian, and if you're Ukrainian, you have to hate Russians. That's it. And Maharaj was making the point. He was giving this lecture in France, in Paris, and he was saying in 1940, if you're French, you're meant to hate the Germans. And if you're German, you hate the French. Now, things have changed. So this is no longer the perspective. We see things in relation to Krishna, in relation to the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the gradual process. Then as one surrenders to the spiritual master, chants the holy name purely, reads these books, performs service with enthusiasm, and follows all the instructions that are given in this book, Upadeshamrita, nectar of instruction, one's devotional service becomes perfect. It's incredible to understand what Krishna consciousness is offering us. Krishna consciousness is offering us darshanam of, the vision, or the ability to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead and interact with Him. It's quite mind-boggling of what Krishna consciousness can take us. What is that? Darshanam hi didikshunam dehi bhagavatarchitam rupam priyatamam swanam sarvendriya gunanjanam. That darshanam hi didikshunam, that the devotee is praying that he wants the vision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What kind of darshan, what vision does he want? Dehi bhagavatarchitam. That the vision that is seen by those who are worshippers of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, those who are devotees, those who are the Bhagavatas, Dehi bhagavatarchitam. Rupam priyatamam swanam. That form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very dear to them. It's very dear to them. And what does it do? Sarvendriya gunanjanam. It is fully pleasing to all the senses, to every sense. Every sense. You see, that's also something that we have not experienced. When we see something may be pleasurable to the eyes, not necessarily pleasurable to the ears. Something may be pleasurable to the eyes but not to the nose. Example, beautiful flower but has no fragrance. Like it looks very, it looks very nice. It's very, it's very nice to see. But when you actually smell it, there's no smell, there's no fragrance. And then But something may be very pleasing to the nose, but not necessarily pleasing to the eyes. This honeysuckle. It's a very, very fragrant flower. So fragrant, such an amazing fragrance. But it's not really that good looking. I mean, it's really frail, very small, It's like just a few strands. It will fall apart any minute, But it's very pleasing to the nose. And the tongue. So I've heard. I haven't had an experience of that, But Krishna is absolute. When one sees Krishna, we have no experience of this. When the form of Krishna that is worshipped by the pure devotees, which is very dear to them, is seen, that form is pleasing to each and every one of our senses. We are seeing Krishna, but our tongue becomes satisfied. Can we have any conception of this? Generally, if you see something that then your tongue is not satisfied until you put it in your mouth. You look at it, if you just keep looking at it, your tongue becomes more and more miserable. It's like, you want to eat it. But Krishna, his form is so amazing that each and every sense of the devotee, the sense organs of the devotee becomes just completely overwhelmed in ecstasy. The skin, the tongue, the eyes, the ears, the nose. And therefore, devotees are not, they cannot sufficiently describe him. Even and Krishna himself exhibits that as in the form of Anantasesh, he has 1,000, he has unlimited mouths actually. He has unlimited mouths and he is describing the unlimited glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and has not found the end to it. So this form of Krishna can be seen when we become Krishna conscious. Prabhupada was seeing. And the point is, to understand if someone has a disease, how do you identify if someone has a particular disease? Through the symptoms. So the point that we are taught in Krishna consciousness is we are taught to cultivate the symptoms of pure love of God in a bona fide way, not a bogus way, in a bona fide manner. By following in the footsteps of the predecessor acharyas, we are taught to cultivate those symptoms of pure devotional service. And then when we see devotees who exhibit those symptoms, we can understand them to be Krishna conscious. And when they are Krishna conscious, they are seeing Krishna, even though they may not say it directly. Because it is something very dear to the heart. It is. And a devotee considering himself to be very fallen doesn't very, easily just reveal that. They don't like to reveal, lest people may either misunderstand or glorify, or just take it as a wrong example. So, we can have. Prabhupada writes here. He says that. A Krishna conscious person can see Krishna in the heart of both the believer and the non-believer. Prabhupada is saying, see Krishna. It is not. We don't have to interpret that. It's very clear. Anything else? Yes, Prabhu.
Rupa Goswami also explains, that in the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that for a pure devotee, everything that they see is like an udipana. Udipana is actually
right. Stimulus.
It stimulates your remembrance of Krishna, in the sense that even for a mother, even if the child is somewhere else, gone to play with his friends or whatever, when she sees his shoes, seeing the shoes of the child reminds the mother of the child it's himself. So similarly, when the pure devotee sees the energy of Krishna, different things remind him of different pastimes of Krishna. He remembers accordingly. For example, Madhavendra Puri was walking and he saw a fresh blue rain cloud and he fainted for 3 days because it reminded him of Krishna's
Krishna's
complexion.
color, yeah.
So
Yeah.
like that.
Color of Krishna. Next verse also is like that. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. This is all talks of the lover and the beloved. And that is why Bhagavad Gita is a song. It's a song. It's a Gita. It's not just instruction. It could have been, Bhagavad Upadesha or something like that, instruction of Supreme Personality of Godhead. But it is a song where Krishna is singing the glorious nature of Bhakti Yoga and the interactions between the devotee and the beloved. Devotee and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the beloved of the devotee. And so this Supreme Personality of Godhead is singing this song to Arjuna. It's very interesting that it's called Gita. Gita just means song. But Krishna loves his devotees so much that he sings about his devotees and he sings about devotional service in the Gita. There is information about Krishna that is found in Bhagavad Gita, but there is more information about devotional service that is found in Bhagavad Gita than of Krishna himself. Such is bhakti, because bhakti is Krishna akarshani. Bhakti attracts even Krishna, that Krishna chooses to sing the glories of bhakti over his own glories. That is Bhagavad Gita. Anything else? Yes, Mataji.
So I think I'm probably quoting you wrong, but you said if we don't show attention to chanting the holy name, then connecting to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is impossible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it gets confusing for me because those who practice different faiths, they're not chanting, Krishna's holy name. So are they connecting to God,
So when I'm using that word connection in the form of yoga. Yoga means to link, and that means perfect linking. Means if we use the word connection in the sense of being connected, meaning in some sort, shape or form, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then there are many, 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 many processes by which one can be, connected to God or the Supreme, etc. But in Bhakti Yoga, we are speaking, or yoga means to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead perfectly. That's a perfect connection. Like, for instance, we are connected to the neighbors here. We're connected. But if you go up to the neighbor and ask them, who are you connected with? They probably would state their, people, whatever, their wife or children or mother, father or friends or whatever. They wouldn't generally say neighbor. Although they would also agree that the neighbor is connected with them because they hardly know them. We hardly know our neighbors. So, the other processes of religion are valid in so much as to the extent that they give knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And to that extent they are connected. Yeyatam mam prapadyante tam stataiva bhajamiham. But if one wants to understand Krishna and one wants to become a devotee of Krishna, one wants to become Krishna conscious, therefore Prabhupada used the word Krishna consciousness, not God consciousness. He wanted to make it very clear who God is, and who is that God is Krishna. And Krishna It's very specific who Krishna is. So for that we have to chant the holy names attentively. Iman Mataji.
You were speaking on that the living entity is either the
By
spirit.
the external or internal. Therefore, we are marginal. But we will be influenced by one or the other. It's not that we'll stay in the margin without it being influenced by neither. That is not possible. Okay. Yes. I've heard that also. Well, I mean, my understanding is there's a whole process, that it's described in the Bhagavatam also. That, that's described for sinful living entities, but, that they're brought in front of Yamaraj and trialed in front of him. But the living entity, depending on what type of birth they're obtaining, it takes a while for them to get to there. For instance, living entities that enter into the womb, they come of human beings, they come in the form of grains. They come through grains. Right? And so for the living entity to enter into the grains, it's said that, the living entities come in the form of rain, enter the soil, then go, and it's a whole process that's described in Shastra. And during, that's that, there might be some period before they obtain the next birth, because everything is a process. There's a process in everything. Okay. But it doesn't mean that the living entity is not influenced. Living entity, as long as he's going through the cycle of birth and death, is still influenced by the external energy. It doesn't mean that for 2 months somehow he has become, I don't know what you want to think, but he's not a pure devotee in those 2 months. No, he's still a conditioned soul, still influenced by the living, still has his subtle body, still full of his material desires. Therefore he's taking another birth. And that subtle body is determining what his next birth is. It has already shaped the next birth. Okay, all right. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.